There's a lot of news flow there, lots of question marks being raised for ICICI Bank. The stock is seeing quite a bit of erosion in trade today. And in fact, let's stick with that story, shall we? And Ruchi Bhatia joins in, my colleague from New Delhi, with the latest in the developments. And this is pertaining to the Videocon trail. The government as well seems to be monitoring the developments in the ICICI Bank Videocon case. Let's bring on board my colleague Ruchi Bhatia, who joins in with the latest. And Ruchi, fill us in with what exactly you're picking up in terms of the government's interference. They're clearly not planning to step in directly, but taking cognizance of what's going on with this case.
This is monitoring the situation with respect to the recent developments in ICICI Bank. But one thing is clear, while ICICI Bank is a part of RBI's most important banks, it is unlikely that the government at all is going to intervene in the ICICI Bank case. However, they're going to be keeping a close eye with respect to the developments through the central bank that has already asked ICICI management and the board to give clarifications on various issues that have been raised. Apart from that, remember the investigative agency, that is ED and CBI, that are looking into the issues of impropriety will also keep Finance Ministry up to date on the kind of issues that have come in. And given the fact that, remember, this is not for the first time that this has happened. The spate of fraud, these issues of impropriety that are happening far too often in the entire banking sector, with the Punjab National Bank 13,000 crore fraud case. Apart from that, this ICICI Bank case, and of course the Axis Bank, the massive rise in NPAs that we have seen, and which obviously goes on to show that there is much more than what meets the eye. And the government also believes that there is a need to keep a stringent mechanism in place to ensure that these systemically important banks do not falter anywhere, and proactive steps are taken in time.
Right. Thanks a lot, Ruchi, for joining us with that. And in fact, in news just coming in, ICICI Bank board will be holding a meeting today. However, they do say that it's not for the corporate governance issues that are being focused on at the moment, but to discuss the areas that are before the NCLT when it comes to the insolvency and bankruptcy court. So that's the only information that we have with us at the moment, that the ICICI Bank is holding a meeting today. Dramatic developments, Avan and Pankaj, over the weekend. I think it was on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, it was a market holiday as well, Mahavir Jayanti, that we had seen the ICICI chairman come out in support of Chanda Kochhar, the MD and CEO, fully in support of Chanda Kochhar, saying that whatever's happening in the media, does not reflect the truth. So you had seen that important press conference that had taken place, which had followed a press release by the board itself, coming out in support of Chanda Kochhar. And now we understand the board is meeting today, but it's to discuss cases that are before the NCLT with respect to the insolvency and bankruptcy court. The notice of stock exchanges does not mention the various corporate governance issues at hand for which the board may be meeting. That's the ICICI Bank stock for you, down by about 6.5%. While we're talking about all of this, the bank, of course, finding itself in the middle of a massive crisis following allegations of quid pro quo against its MD and CEO Chanda Kochhar. The market regulator, SEBI, is certainly keeping a close watch on the bank and all the various stories and announcements that are being issued. ET Now's Vijay Ganesan Iyer joining us with that exclusive story. Hi, Vijay. Obviously, this is the concern of all regulators. What falls under the SEBI's domain, and what exactly is it planning? As you can see, the stock is under pressure today.
Nandra, as you're precisely talking about how the stocks have reacted after a long weekend today of ICICI Bank, market regulator SEBI is keeping a close watch to ensure that the management and the board, when it comes to disclosures, make disclosures on real-time basis to the exchanges, thereby disseminating the information to the shareholders at large, because they don't want any time lag when it comes to dissemination of information, because that is where particularly they are keeping a watch on disclosures, because at the end of the day, a lot of news flow is happening from various quarters and various channels. That is why SEBI wants to ensure that the board disseminates the information, whether it's pertaining to investigating agency or whether it's pertaining to some regulatory intervention or questions being raised by RBI as a banking regulator to shareholders at large. Say, for example, over the weekend, as you're rightly pointing out, CBI has launched a preliminary inquiry on ICICI Bank, though MD and CEO Chanda Kochhar has not been named in this PE with a Videocon group transactions. Clearly, this is some information which is yet to flow to the exchanges via notice by ICICI Bank management. So these are sort of issues which SEBI is keeping a close watch, which will have any material and immediate rather impact on the stock. So clearly market regulator SEBI, from MPA perspective, they say they have a limited role to play with RBI being the primary banking regulator, but they're keeping a close watch when it comes to any disclosures related issues from ICICI Bank and particularly the role played by board and the independent directors.
Right, Vijay. Thank you so much for keeping us up to date with what's happening on that front. But let's cover all angles of this story. ICICI Bank, the stock is down 10%. Poonam is now joining us. Poonam, what are brokerages like Macquarie, which have outperformed on this name, talking?
Right. In fact, Pankaj, if you read Macquarie's note and if you in fact read what ICICI Bank has already stated in terms of the exchanges, ICICI Bank board is definitely being fairly supportive of MD and CEO Chanda Kochhar. But having said that, if you look at the contents of the entire exchange release, Macquarie states that the entire release is leaving them with more questions than answers, and in fact a lot of investors do seem to be slightly concerned about the fact. They're also stating that we're already seeing the media reporting that there is a CBI preliminary inquiry on both Ms. Kochhar's husband as well as Mr. Dhoot. That's a preliminary inquiry by CBI. So that is going on, and the entire outcome of the investigation by the CBI would be very, very important to understand how it would really impact the stock price. If you look at the stock price, definitely there is negative sentiment on account of this entire news flow, although the board has been fairly supportive. But investors, of course, do question, and hence they're stating that they're not too, there's still a lot of questions that need answers for. From a stock valuation point of view, which is slightly different, they're stating the stock is trading in nearly around 1x FY20 price to book, and as such, they do have an outperform rating on the stock with a target price of nearly around 425 rupees per share. But the recent news flow is definitely negative. ICICI Bank board is also going to meet today. In the exchanges, ICICI Bank is also stating that board will be meeting today, and this is a pre-scheduled board meeting in order to review the entire NCLT cases and the progress on the same. So we will really have to watch out for what is the outcome of the board meeting in terms of the NCLT resolution cases, etc. But this news bit is slightly negative. We also saw Axis Bank news flow, which is again in slight negative sentiment is there. Axis Bank again is in light from a different perspective altogether, with RBI possibly seeming to be writing to the board of Axis Bank regarding extension of Ms. Sharma's tenure. So we even need to watch out for that, but both the corporate lenders seem to be slightly impacted by negative news flow in today's trade.
There's also one announcement which has just come right now, which says that there is a board meet today, but that is to consider NCLT IBC cases. What do you make of that?
Well, Pankaj, if you look at the entire NCLT IBC cases, I think that with the kind of resolution that we are seeing and with the kinds of bids that we are seeing, especially in terms of the steel sector, it is definitely good. And I think ICICI Bank would be one of the key beneficiaries because they do have good amount of exposure to the steel sector. And there is a possibility that they do see some amount of respite in terms of the provisions, if at all we do some resolution further in terms of the steel sector bid. So I guess that should be positive from ICICI Bank perspective. The resolution of the stressed sector should be definitely positive for them. If you notice today also, Bank of India MD CEO was on our channel, and even he mentioned that the kind of exposure that he is having to NCLT1, and he has provided 100%, they are expecting some provision right back. So depending upon the amount of provision that ICICI Bank has done, it could be anywhere over 60 odd percent. So assuming a 60 or 70 odd percent exposure, provision is done to the entire NCLT cases, depending on the entire provisions, that there is a possibility of some write back if at all excess has been provided, and some resolution is already on the way for some of the key steel sectors. So that should be positive for ICICI Bank.
Thanks, Poonam, for keeping us in the loop and giving us the latest as to what exactly one can expect on that front. In fact, let's take forward this discussion as well as talk a little bit about the macros. We have Maithili Bushnurmat, the consulting editor, ET, now joining in. We have Mr. BP Sharma, the former ED at Bank of India, as well on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time out. Maithili, I'm going to begin with you. You know, so far, one was talking about all of the scams and frauds that were associated with the PSU banking space, and now all of these revelations are talking about some of the most marquee and respected names within the private banking sector, the likes of ICICI Bank and Axis Bank, etc., for different reasons. How exactly do you expect the overall credit demand or the perception that one has now towards the banking sector as a whole in light of these kind of allegations?
Well, I think the first and most important thing is to realize is that misdemeanors, frauds, irregularities are part and parcel of the entire banking process itself. The question is, does it exceed what is, a minimum kind of level, and what is the nature of these kind of misdemeanors, irregularities, etc. So clearly, in the case of ICICI Bank, until we get to know the entire truth behind this, we get a CBI inquiry, there will be a number of questions that remain unanswered, despite the statement of the bank CEO, Mr. M.K. Sharma. It's very important to know what was the sequence of events. Was there any kind of, obvious or not so obvious relationship between the loans given to the Videocon company, Venugopal Dhuth, and the company headed by the CEO's husband? It's very important to realize, was there a quid pro quo or not? So I think it's important that we get a full inquiry into this, what the entire process. When did these things happen? What was the role of the CEO? Was it made clear that what is the relationship? And in fact, more interesting also would be know what is the action taken by all the regulators, the RBI, the SEBI, the Finance Ministry, on the letter sent by the whistleblower, which was sent 2 years ago. So clearly, did they investigate? What did the investigations reveal? I think there are a number of questions that we really need to know. And until we get to know the bottom of the things, of the CBI inquiry, I think ICICI Bank will certainly not look very good in the light of the revelations. So I think it sets the, as I say, the playing field level, as it were, between PSPs and private sector banks to show that irregularities, frauds, etc., happen across the board. And what is important is that do you have a system to ensure that these things do not happen, and when they happen, prompt action is taken immediately to penalize the guilty.
Hi, Mike. This is Nentara. In fact, this is the conversation we're going to be having with you, as well as Mr. BP Sharma, the former Executive Director at Bank of India, who's joining us on the phone line. Maithi, before I hand the reins over to you, I just had a quick question for Mr. Sharma. Hi, Mr. Sharma. You know, before this entire corporate governance issue at ICICI Bank came to light, and before the RBI, before we got to know how the RBI has reached out to Axis Bank, saying that maybe Shikha Sharma's 4th term should not be extended in light of what's been happening at Axis, the clamor for privatization of banks had only been getting louder. That was on the back of all the scams that had been taking place, Nirav Modi, Punjab National Bank, etc. Now that you know that the rot is so deep, and even the private sector may not have been spared, that it might be including, some of India's largest corporate houses as well, do you think it makes sense to privatize banks, Mr. Sharma?
See, what has been happening is that the things are getting aggravated by all these tech players. It is not a question of private sector bank and public sector bank. If you see in spirit, both private sector and public sector banks are dealing with public money. They are all regulated by the same regulator, RBI. The law of the land is same to both the groups. The question is, we are discussing the symptoms that accounts have become NPA, some market deal here and there. But let's see the cause and reasons. This is a country where rich people default and get away with that because the law is not stringent. We are not addressing that issue. We are discussing micro cases in one bank or another bank. No other country. You see, Western countries, Japan, even a country like Dubai, it is extremely difficult for somebody to deliberately default and get away with that. This is the broader issue. we can have endless debate on private versus public sector. Of course, when this episode took place in PNU, which has nothing to do with loan, it was an operational risk that crystallized. The entire debate started to privatize the public sector banks. And those people who were arguing that did not provide any solution as to in case where a private sector bank fails. And we have n number of examples. Before nationalization and post-nationalization, a number of private sector banks have failed, but the depositors' money were protected because they were taken over by the public sector banks. This fact is ignored. Now, will they give the guarantee that if the banks are privatized, the public's money will be safe? The answer
Mr.
is
Sharma, I take
no.
that point. I take that point. Mr. Sharma, I take your point on the symptoms, etc. But the bigger question also is what were the regulators doing? If you did have a whistleblower informing and complaining to the system about all of this, what happened in the last 2 years? That also needs to be discussed. What were the regulators doing after the system was alerted?
See, that is definitely a question which has come up. Up till now, it was only the banks who were being discussed. But after this operational risk in PNB crystallized, the question, the role of regulator is definitely under focus. I can only tell you the Reserve Bank of India is one of the stringent regulators globally. They have a reputation like that. And to the another point that is very important to note that the frauds are taking place even in advanced countries. Per se, a regulator cannot prevent all the frauds, but the effectiveness of a regulator is definitely measured how far they are active and able to prevent. In PNB case, I do not know whether that branch was audited by RBI or not. That is something I think the RBI can answer that question in a better way. But then for a regulator with so many billions of transactions taking place, keeping a watch and preventing may not be feasible in all the cases. But that definitely puts additional responsibility on the regulator, on the other stakeholders, and the banks as well.
Yes, Mr. Sharma, you're entirely right on that no regulator anywhere in the world can stop all irregularities, all frauds in the banking sector. And by and large, in India, we really haven't seen any banking crises of the kind that we have seen in other foreign countries. So for that, a great deal of credit must go to the Reserve Bank of India. But in this particular context, where a whistleblower had sent a letter to the regulator, can we say that the regulator perhaps did not act with the alacrity that it should have? Because remember, Urjit Patel has just gone on record saying that he wishes he had the same kind of powers for public sector banks that he had for private sector banks. So here is the case where there's no lack of power as per his own words, and yet the Reserve Bank of India apparently did not do anything. So does this not cast a number of questions about what the Reserve Bank's own actions were in response to the whistleblower's letter? Mr. Sharma?
To be fair to RBI, if we are discussing ICICI and Videocon, it won't be fair to single out ICICI because 20 banks have sanctioned this loan to Videocon. And State Bank was the leader. And I think if I remember correctly, this entire project was appraised by this SBI caps and IDBI caps. So to single out ICICI will not be fair. RBI is concerned with the type of loan a bank sanctions or takes exposure in a group. And that RBI must have taken into consideration. But the subsequent events or the claim events that is getting unfolded probably at that particular time was not in the purview of the RBI. I'm sure the kind of revelation that is coming out subject to verification, RBI must have been seized with the matter. Here we are discussing in isolation. Then ICICI has only taken less than 10% share based on the assessment made by the consortium leader, that is State Bank of India.
Okay, we're going to leave it at that, Mr. Sharma. Thanks so much for joining us. Clearly, this is the big story that is unfolding when it comes to ICICI Bank as well as Axis Bank. There is a board meeting of ICICI Bank today. It is a pre-scheduled meeting on insolvency and bankruptcy code. Stay tuned to ET Now for all the twists and turns and all the developments that are unfolding.